There's a number you've been chasing. Maybe you hit it last month. Maybe you're close. Maybe you passed it years ago and never stopped to notice. $100,000 in savings. It was supposed to be the moment everything changed. The moment you could finally exhale. The moment money stopped being a constant, low-grade anxiety humming in the background of your life. But you hit the number and nothing happened. You checked your account, saw 6 figures, maybe felt a brief spark of pride. And then by Tuesday, you were back to worrying about whether you could afford to replace the water heater. You're sitting on 100 grand and you still hesitate before buying the nicer cut of steak. You still feel a knot in your chest when an unexpected bill arrives. You still feel broke. This isn't ingratitude. This isn't you being bad with money. This is a predictable psychological phenomenon that traps almost everyone who reaches this milestone. And understanding why it happens is the difference between staying stuck and actually feeling wealthy. And today we're going to dissect the exact mental mechanisms that turn a 6-figure savings account into something that feels like nothing. We're going to talk about hedonic adaptation, the endowment effect, relative wealth perception, and the invisible goalpost that keeps moving no matter how fast you run. By the end of this, you'll understand why your brain refuses to let you feel rich, and more importantly, what you can do to break the spell. Let's start with the most brutal truth about human psychology. Your brain doesn't care about absolute numbers. It cares about change. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation, and it's the reason why lottery winners return to baseline happiness within a year. Your brain is a machine designed to adapt to whatever your current circumstances are, and then recalibrate your expectations accordingly. When you had $10,000 saved, $100,000 felt impossible. It felt like winning. But the moment you crossed that threshold, your brain didn't throw a parade. It immediately started scanning for the next threat, the next gap, the next reason to stay vigilant. Because for 99% of human evolutionary history, complacency meant death. The tribe that relaxed when food was plentiful got wiped out by the tribe that kept preparing for winter. So your brain takes that $100,000, and within weeks, maybe days, it becomes your new normal. It becomes the baseline, and once something is baseline, it stops generating positive emotion. This is why you still feel broke. You're not measuring your wealth against where you started. You're measuring it against an invisible standard that your brain keeps raising to match your current reality. Let's talk about what that $100,000 actually represents in the modern economy, because this is where the math gets depressing. If you're in your 30s or 40s, conventional financial advice says you should have roughly 1 times your annual salary saved by age 30 and 3 times by age 40. If you're making $60,000 a year and you've saved $100,000, you're ahead of schedule. You should feel great. Here's the problem. That $100,000 is not spending money. It's not freedom money. It's insurance money. It's the emergency fund, the house down payment fund. It's the don't get fired and lose everything fund. Financial advisors tell you that you need 3 to 6 months of expenses in liquid savings. If your monthly expenses are $5,000, that's $15,000 to $30,000 tied up right there. You need another $20,000 to $40,000 for a down payment. If you ever want to own a home in a market where median home prices are $400,000 or more, you probably should have another $10,000 to $20,000 set aside for the car that will inevitably need replacement, or the medical bill that insurance won't fully cover. When you add it up, that $100,000 is already spoken for. It's been earmarked and subdivided into a dozen different future obligations before you ever got to enjoy it. You can't spend it because spending it means dismantling your safety net, and your brain knows that. So the money sits there doing its job of making you technically solvent, but it doesn't make you feel wealthy because you can't touch it. This brings us to the endowment effect. This is the cognitive bias where people value things more highly simply because they own them. You would never pay $100,000 for a used car, but if someone offered you $80,000 for your $100,000 investment account, you'd laugh them out of the room. Once you own something, your brain inflates its value to you. It becomes precious. It becomes untouchable. This effect is supposed to protect you from bad trades, but it has a dark side. When you save $100,000, your brain immediately starts treating it as a thing you own that must not be lost. Every dollar becomes a brick in a fortress you're defending. You're no longer a person with resources. You're a person with something to lose, and psychologically, the fear of loss is roughly 2 times more powerful than the pleasure of gain. Losing $50 hurts more than gaining $50 feels good. But you hit $100,000 and your brain doesn't celebrate. It goes into defense mode. It starts catastrophizing. What if the market crashes and this becomes 80,000? What if I lose my job and I have to burn through this in 6 months? What if there's a medical emergency and this evaporates? The money stops being a source of security and starts being a source of anxiety. Here's where it gets even more twisted. You're not just comparing your wealth to your own past. You're comparing it to everyone around you. This is called relative wealth perception, and it's one of the most powerful drivers of financial dissatisfaction in human psychology. A study from the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people care more about their relative income compared to peers than they do about their absolute income. In other words, people would rather make $60,000 when their friends make $50,000 than make $80,000 when their friends make $100,000. You've saved $100,000. That's an incredible achievement. But then you scroll Instagram and see your college roommate posting from a vacation in Greece. You see your coworker driving a brand new Audi. You see your cousin buying a house with a backyard big enough for a pool. You don't know that the vacation was financed on credit cards, that the Audi is a lease the coworker can't afford, or that your cousin is drowning in a $700,000 mortgage at 7% interest. All you see is the signal, and the signal says they have more than you. Your brain doesn't process $100,000 in a vacuum. It processes it relative to what it perceives as the median success level of your peer group. And if your peer group appears to be living larger than you, your brain files your $100,000 under not enough and keeps you in scarcity mode. There's also the issue of purchasing power erosion. $100,000 today does not have the same weight as $100,000 did 20 years ago. If you adjust for inflation, $100,000 in 2005 is equivalent to about $155,000 today. If you're 40 years old and you've saved $100,000, you're essentially where someone with $65,000 was 2 decades ago. The goalpost moved, but your mental anchor didn't update. And it's not just inflation. The costs of the big-ticket items that define middle-class stability have grown faster than wages and faster than general inflation. Median home prices have more than doubled in many markets over the past 2 decades. College tuition has tripled. Healthcare costs have skyrocketed. So even though $100,000 sounds like a lot, it doesn't buy what it used to. Your brain senses this gap between the symbolic weight of the number and its actual purchasing power, and that dissonance generates unease. Let me introduce you to a concept called the arrival fallacy. This is the cognitive trap where you believe that achieving a specific milestone will bring lasting happiness. But when you arrive, the satisfaction evaporates almost immediately. You told yourself that once you hit 100,000, you'd feel secure. But the moment you got there, your brain set a new target. Now it's 200,000. Or it's 100,000 plus a paid-off car. Or it's 100,000 plus maxed-out retirement contributions. The goalpost is always moving because your brain is not designed to be satisfied. It's designed to keep you striving. This is an evolutionary feature, not a bug. Our ancestors who felt satisfied and stopped gathering resources during the good times died when winter came or when the drought hit. The ones who survived were the ones who never stopped feeling like they needed more. We are the descendants of the anxious, the strivers, the people who looked at a full granary and thought, this isn't enough. So your $100,000 becomes just another checkpoint on a race that has no finish line. You thought it was the destination, but it was just mile marker 12 on an infinite road. Now let's talk about the invisible tax of lifestyle inflation. As you earned your way to that $100,000, your income probably went up. Maybe you started at $40,000 a year and you're now making $75,000. Your brain didn't keep your lifestyle pinned to the $40,000 level. It upgraded gradually. You moved to a nicer apartment, you bought a newer car, you started eating out more, you subscribed to more services. Each upgrade felt small in isolation, but cumulatively, they ate the surplus. This is Parkinson's law applied to personal finance. Expenses expand to meet income. You're making more, so you're saving more, but you're also spending more. The gap between your income and your expenses stayed roughly the same. You built the savings account, but you didn't build margin. Without margin, the savings don't translate into felt wealth. They just translate into, I'm keeping up. The people who feel wealthy at $100,000 saved are the people who kept their expenses flat as their income grew. They're making $75,000 but living like they make $45,000. That $30,000 gap per year becomes pure margin. It becomes optionality. It becomes the fuel for compounding. But most people don't do this because lifestyle inflation is invisible and socially reinforced. Your peer group upgrades, so you upgrade. The standard of normal rises, and you rise with it, never realizing that you've traded wealth accumulation for status signaling. Here's a number that should terrify you. According to the Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances, the median net worth for a household headed by someone aged 35 to 44 is about $92,000. If you've saved $100,000 in cash alone, you're already above median. You're doing better than half the country in your age bracket. But you don't feel like you're winning because you're not comparing yourself to the median American. You're comparing yourself to the top 20%, the people on social media, the people in your office who seem to have it all together. This is the comparison trap, and it's vicious. You're running a race against people who are either ahead of you in earnings, ahead of you in inheritance, or ahead of you in fake it till you make it debt. You can't win a race against an imaginary competitor, but your brain doesn't know the competitor's imaginary. It just knows you're not in first place, so it keeps you in hustle mode. Let's address the retirement anxiety component because this is a huge driver of the broke feeling. Financial planners will tell you that to retire comfortably, you need to have saved roughly 10 to 12 times your annual salary by the time you stop working. If you're making $60,000 a year, that means you need $600,000 to $720,000 saved by age 65 to maintain your current lifestyle. If you're 35 and you've saved $100,000, simple math says you're on track. Compound that at 7% annually for 30 years, and you're looking at over $760,000 without adding another dollar. But your brain doesn't do compound interest math intuitively. It does a linear projection. It looks at the 100,000 and thinks, I need 700,000. I'm 1/7 of the way there. That's nothing. It discounts the power of compounding, and it amplifies the perceived distance to the goal. So even though the math says you're fine, the emotional math says you're screwed. There's also the issue of liquidity versus net worth. You might have 100,000 saved, but if 80,000 of it is in a retirement account, you can't access it without penalties. Psychologically, money you can't touch doesn't feel real. It's theoretical wealth. It's a number on a screen that you're not allowed to use. So even though your net worth says 100,000, your felt wealth is based on the 20,000 in your checking and savings accounts. And 20,000, while solid, doesn't feel like financial freedom. It feels like a few months of breathing room. This is why high earners often feel broke despite large retirement balances. They've optimized for future security at the expense of present liquidity. They can't enjoy the wealth they've built because it's locked away behind tax penalties and withdrawal restrictions. They're rich on paper and cash poor in practice. Let me tell you what's not talked about enough: the psychological burden of being the responsible one. If you've saved $100,000, you're probably the person in your social circle who has their act together. You're the one who doesn't blow money on stupid things. You're the one who saves, who plans, who sacrifices present pleasure for future security. And that role is exhausting. You watch your friends take spontaneous trips, buy new gadgets, lease cars they can't afford, and you feel like the boring one. You feel like you're missing out on life because you're being financially prudent. And the kicker is that your friends seem just as happy as you, maybe happier, because they're not carrying the mental load of financial planning. They're living for today while you're optimizing for a future that might never come. This creates resentment. You resent the system for making you choose between enjoying life and securing your future. You resent your friends for not having to make that choice, even though you know intellectually that they're just delaying their reckoning. And that resentment poisons the satisfaction you should feel from hitting 100,000. So how do you fix this? How do you make $100,000 feel like $100,000? The first step is to stop moving the goalpost. You need to define what enough actually means and commit to that number. Not as a vague aspiration, but as a hard threshold. If you decide that $150,000 in liquid savings is your enough number, then when you hit $150,000, you stop. You declare victory. You shift from accumulation mode to maintenance mode. You give yourself permission to spend the surplus on life instead of piling it into the fortress. This is terrifying for most people because it requires trusting that the plan will work. It requires letting go of the anxiety that's been your fuel. But without a finish line, you will run forever and feel broke forever, no matter how much you save. The second step is to practice gratitude resets. Once a month, look at your account balance and force yourself to remember what it felt like when you had $1,000 saved. Remember the panic of living paycheck to paycheck. Your brain has adapted to 100,000 as the baseline. So you need to manually remind it that 100,000 is not normal. It's exceptional. The median American has less than 5,000 in savings. You're holding 20 times that. That's not nothing. The third step is to decouple your self-worth from your net worth. This is easier said than done, but it's critical. Your value as a human being is not determined by your bank balance. You are not a better person because you saved $100,000. You're a more financially secure person, but not a better person. When you stop using money as a proxy for worthiness, the pressure eases and the number stops carrying so much emotional weight. The fourth step is to create permission-based spending. Set aside a small percentage of your wealth, maybe 5%, as guilt-free money. That's $5,000 that you're allowed to spend on something impractical, something fun, something that has no ROI other than joy. This gives your brain proof that the wealth is real and usable. It breaks the cycle of defensive hoarding. The fifth step is to stop comparing. Unfollow the people on social media who make you feel behind. Stop tracking what your coworkers drive or where your friends vacation. Run your own race. Define your own scoreboard. The only comparison that matters is you versus past you, and if you've saved $100,000, past you would be in awe. Here's the uncomfortable truth. $100,000 is both a lot and not enough, and which one it feels like depends